3,912 meters. One rusted sniper rifle older than every recruit on that field. They laughed at her, called it scrap metal, said it belonged in a museum. But when 19 hostages' lives depended on a single shot, she laid down, took a breath, and pulled the trigger. What happened next didn't just break a 35-year world record. It exposed a secret buried so deep the military tried to erase it from history. So who was she, and why did her bullet change everything? You're watching a simple woman. Hit subscribe right now, because the next 10 minutes will make you say, there is no way this really happened. 3,912 meters. One shot, one life, or 19 deaths. And the only weapon she carried was a rusted sniper rifle older than every recruit on the field. The moment Nora Vale set it down, the line of soldiers erupted in laughter. They saw nothing but scrap metal, a relic that belonged in a glass case. But what none of them knew was that this very weapon held a secret carved into its steel, a secret the military had buried for 35 years. The desert morning pressed down on Fort Ashridge with a weight of heat, the air shimmering above the long flat stretch of sand and stone. Recruits lined the range, their weapons gleaming in the rising sun, sleek carbons, digital optics with laser reticles, HUD displays that pulse data with each flicker of wind. It looked less like a rifle line than a technology expo. Every face wore pride, each man and woman eager to prove superiority through cutting-edge glass and steel. Then came the scrape of old metal on dirt. Nora placed her rifle on the ground, bipod legs sinking slightly into the grit. The weapon was unmistakably outdated. A Cold War M8201, paint chipped away, stock cracked at the grip, scope fogged by age. Its once black barrel had dulled into a tired grey, scarred with pits and scratches. It had survived storms, deserts, perhaps wars most here had only read about. Calendray saw it first, his laugh cutting sharp. "You serious, Vale? That thing fires bullets or dust?" His words carried down the line, drawing smirks and muffled chuckles. Others leaned in to get a look, shaking their heads, some raising phones to snap quiet pictures. "Careful," another muttered. "Pull the trigger, it might explode before the round leaves the chamber." Nora didn't rise to the bait. She adjusted the bipod, her hands steady. Dust clung to the sweat on her knuckles as she ran her palm over the stock. Her fingertips found the faint engraving, nearly invisible, worn into the steel, EV Delta Ridge 90. She lingered there for a breath, as if the letters whispered back. 600 meters. Captain Jace Harlow's commands snapped the field into order. His voice had the weight of stone, uncompromising, stripped of warmth. Targets shimmered in the heat haze, steel squares waiting to be struck. The recruits dropped prone, rifles aligned, scopes locking. Kellen went first. His movements were textbook, his HUD flickering with numbers as he dialed adjustments. The crack of his rifle split the air, his rounds grouping tight on steel. He rolled back with a smirk, tilting his head toward Nora. "Top that, museum girl." Nora slid into position. The weight of the rifle pressed against her shoulder, heavier than the polished guns around her. The scope glass was cloudy, but she had never needed perfection to see. She inhaled, tasted the dry iron of the desert, listened. The wind whispered low across the valley, bending grass, stirring faint dust spirals. She adjusted not by numbers but by instinct, the way her pulse matched the breath of the land. The trigger broke. The thunder of the old weapon rolled across the sand. For a half-second, silence stretched. Then the steel at 600 meters rang with a center strike. Clear, undeniable. Laughter faltered. Nora pulled the bolt, chambered another round, exhaled slowly. The second shot cracked. Another perfect hit, cutting nearly into the first. The recruits stared, words lost, the desert wind carrying nothing but the echo of her rifle. She rose, brushed grit from her sleeve, and set the rifle carefully back on its bipod. No smirk, no word. Her silence struck harder than any boast could have. Captain Harlow walked forward. His boots left prints in the dust as he crouched, lifting the weapon in scarred hands. His thumb brushed the engraving, the letters E. Fifth, his expression froze, eyes narrowing, a shadow cutting across his face. For a breath, discipline slipped, the facade of the unshakable commander cracking. Then it returned, harder than before. "Vale," he said, voice low but carrying. "Report to my office at 1600. Bring the rifle." The recruits shifted uneasily. Kellen's grin had vanished. Reka Mora's eyes followed Nora, not with mockery, but with something closer to curiosity. That evening, Nora sat on her bunk, the rifle across her lap. Desert wind pressed against the windows, rattling the frame. Her fingers traced the stock, finding the seam again, the odd ridge. She pressed, twisted. A hidden panel slid free with a soft click. Inside lay a folded strip of silk, its surface etched with strange circles, arrows and lines, like a secret map of the air. Beneath it, a slip of yellowed paper, ink faded but legible. Hush the noise, hear the wind. The initials at the bottom made her throat tighten. E. Fifth, the laughter of the morning felt like a lifetime ago. In its place was the weight of history pressing against her chest. She understood now. This rifle was no relic. It was a key. And it had just unlocked something far more dangerous than anyone around her could imagine. The office smelled of gun oil and leather. Captain Jace Harlow stood by the window, arms crossed, his silhouette cut against the last light of day. Behind the desk sat Director Sloane Merrick, his uniform immaculate, every ribbon perfectly aligned, his stare sharp enough to slice through stone. The old rifle rested across Nora's arms as she stepped in, spine straight, pulse thundering. "Vale," Harlow said, his voice flat. "This is Director Merrick. He oversees assignments beyond Fort Ashridge." Merrick leaned forward, eyes flicking to the weapon like a predator noticing prey. "So this is the piece," he murmured, "and you fired it with precision." He let the silence stretch. "Where did you get it?" Nora swallowed. "It was my mother's. She gave it to me when I was 12. Merrick's gaze sharpened. "Your mother's name?" "Etta Vale." The air in the room thickened. Harlow's jaw clenched, and Merrick's expression, once stone, cracked just enough for Nora to see a ripple of something. Recognition. Maybe fear. He tapped his finger once on the desk. "You understand that name carries history," he said. "History that was never meant to survive." Confusion tightened Nora's chest. She gripped the rifle harder. "Sir?" Harlow broke in, his voice clipped. "Delta Ridge, 1990, a classified mission. The engraving on that weapon is not decoration. It marks a shot that altered the course of an entire campaign. That's all you need to know, for now." Merrick opened a folder stamped with crimson ink. Inside were satellite images, dense forest mountains, hidden compounds, structures with no markings. He pushed them across the desk. "This is High Pines," he said, "off map, off record. It houses Project Hushline." His words carried the weight of something that lived in shadow. "Hushline isn't ordinary training," Harlow added. "It takes soldiers who can see what numbers miss. Those who can turn chaos into clarity." Merrick's gaze drilled into her. "You showed signs today, signs we haven't seen since Delta Ridge. That's why you're here, not because of bloodline, because of intuition." Nora's throat felt dry. She wanted to ask 100 questions. What really happened in 1990, why her mother's initials were etched into steel, but all she could manage was a nod. "Sign," Merrick said, sliding a paper across the desk. "Your choice, but understand this, once you enter High Pines, you don't go back to barracks life. You become part of something the world denies exists." Her hand trembled as she took the pen, but hesitation didn't last. She signed. By dawn, she was in a transport van cutting through back roads, the rifle across her lap, silk strip hidden in her pocket. Trees swallowed the horizon, jagged ridges rising like teeth. No signs marked the way, only endless forest until a chain-link gate appeared, topped with glinting wire. Guards flanked the entrance, faces unreadable, rifles custom-built, insignias stripped away. One scanned her badge. Another lifted the rifle, eyes flicking over the scarred steel. Neither spoke. The gate buzzed open. The van rolled deeper into high pines. The compound appeared plain, clusters of concrete buildings, industrial and cold, yet the silence was heavier than steel, an absence of sound that felt deliberate. A figure waited on the steps of the main hall, lean, wiry, built of sinew and grit. His eyes were pale, cutting, like glass in winter. He didn't smile. "You're late," he said, though she wasn't. "I'm Master Sergeant Flint Acker. I trained alongside Harbour Light." His voice was gravel, every word scraped raw. "And I bury excuses. Don't look for sympathy here." Behind Nora, another truck arrived. Doors slammed and more recruits stepped down. Kellen Dre, his grin cocky as ever. Reka Mora, quiet, eyes sharp. Nolan Price, broad-shouldered, adjusting his cap. Ari Sen, slim, calm, carrying a case of instruments with the focus of a surgeon. "This is your intake," Acker barked. 5 of you, different skills, same test. Don't mistake invitation for acceptance. Legacy doesn't pay tuition." His gaze locked on Nora, cold as frost. Not even veils. The recruits traded glances, tension coiling tight. Without waiting for reply, Acker turned and strode into the building. Inside, the halls were narrow, grey, stripped of comfort. Bunks were small, private, each door shutting with mechanical finality. Silence was their only welcome. Before the sun had risen the next day, Acker kicked doors open, barking them onto the range. Fog clung to the valley below like a sea of smoke, targets scattered from 600 to beyond 1,500 meters. "Diagnostic day," Acker announced, his voice carrying over the mist. 3 shots per distance. We measure skill, not talk." The recruits dropped prone. Metal clicked. Breath held. Nora slid behind her rifle. Her fingers brushed the silk strip folded in her pocket, her mother's words still burning in her mind. "Hush the noise. Hear the wind." The air tasted heavy, alive. Whatever High Pines demanded, she knew the silence had already chosen her. Fog draped the valley like a living curtain, curling over the ridgelines and drifting through the firing lanes. The recruits lay prone in damp grass, their breath pluming pale in the morning cold. The steel targets shimmered faintly against the mist, silent witnesses to what would unfold. Kellen Dre went first. His rifle gleamed, every adjustment dialed with mechanical precision. He checked his digital display, thumbed wind data into the onboard system, and fired. 3 sharp cracks rang across the valley. His grouping at 600 meters was tight, near perfect. At 900 he still held his line. At 1200 the fog distorted the air, but he adjusted, punching 2 clean hits and a third clipping the edge. He rose from his mat with a smirk, brushing dew from his sleeve. "Take notes," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Reka Mora stepped up next. She took longer, her breathing steady, patience etched into every motion. At 600 she scored clean hits. At 900 she slowed, corrected carefully, and at 1200 she managed a pair of strikes, the third scraping steel. Her face gave away nothing. Nolan Price's shots were heavier, less refined. His first 2 hit, his third went wide. He cursed under his breath, then moved to the next line, his groupings serviceable but uninspired. Ari Sen did not fire at all. He crouched beside his instruments, feeding numbers to the others, noting pressure, humidity, and wind shifts with sharp clinical efficiency. Then came Nora Vale. She slid onto the mat at 600, pressed her cheek to the scarred stock, and let her breathing fall into rhythm. She didn't check devices. She read the grass bending on the ridge, the tiny ripples in the fog. Her first 3 shots cracked in steady succession. All 3 landed center plate. At 900 she adjusted a fraction, the old scope cloudy but enough. 3 more hits, each ringing steel with authority. At 1100 the valley grew tricky, fog twisting currents in unseen layers. She closed her eyes for a breath, listened, then fired. The target rang. A second followed. The third struck just outside, a near miss. She exhaled, jaw tight but calm. The murmurs began then. Recruits who had scoffed at her relic weapon shifted, whispering. Even Kellen's smirk faltered, but Acker was not satisfied. He raised his hand. 1,500. It was a distance designed to humble. Fog warped the valley, currents sliding like invisible rivers. Kellen had struggled, Raker had clipped. Now it was Nora's turn. She inhaled, adjusted, and fired. The crack thundered across the mist. The round flew, a breathless half-second, and missed wide. She reloaded quickly, recalibrated by instinct. Second shot, closer, scraping the edge but not center. Her final attempt she steadied, every nerve aligned, every ounce of focus burning into the trigger pull. The rifle roared. The shot vanished into fog, and when the echo returned, the plate remained untouched. Kellen barked a laugh, sharp and cutting. "So much for legend steel," he said. "Guess antiques don't shoot past story range." The sound cut through Nora more than the miss itself, but she kept her face still, rolled the rifle back onto safe, and stood. Master Sergeant Acker scribbled on his clipboard, his pale eyes giving away nothing. "Secure rifles. Debrief at 1900. His voice carried no praise, no blame, only finality. The recruits rose in silence, tension thick in the air. Kellen's swagger returned, the others avoiding Nora's eyes. She walked back slowly, the weight of the rifle heavy in her hands. That night she could not rest. The barracks were silent except for the faint creak of bunks. Nora lay awake, the words on the slip of paper burning in her mind. Hush the noise. Hear the wind. She rose quietly, taking the rifle with her, stepping out into the cold night. The memorial garden sat on the edge of the woods, rows of unmarked stones gleaming silver under moonlight. She walked among them until she saw a figure seated alone, Master Sergeant Acker. He did not turn when she approached. "He came here too," Acker said, his voice low, gravel softened by memory. "Your mother. First week at Hushline, she missed long shots, thought she'd failed." Nora's breath caught. Acker finally looked at her, his eyes sharp as ice. One miss drove her to find what numbers couldn't. The hush method. Not silence, not calculation. It's stepping into a place where the noise cannot touch you. He rose, leaving her alone among the stones. The wind shifted, brushing the grass. Nora stood still, the words echoing through her chest. She wasn't chasing a relic, she was chasing a voice. When she returned to her bunk, she examined the rifle again. Her fingers pressed along the seams until something clicked. A hidden compartment slid open. Inside lay a small oilcloth bundle. She unwrapped it to reveal a notebook, its pages filled with precise handwriting and diagrams of wind layers, thermal spirals, margins scrawled with reminders. Don't silence doubt. Set it aside. The hush is not the absence, it is control. Her heart raced. The rifle was not only a weapon, it was a book, a legacy. And tomorrow she would need it more than ever. The forest was black as ink, its branches clutching at the recruits like skeletal hands. No lanterns, no glow of electronics, only the cold gleam of rifles and the crunch of boots on pine needles. Master Sergeant Flint Acker led them deeper into the trees, his silhouette sharp against the faint silver of moonlight. The air was raw, filled with damp earth and the smell of pine sap. "Tonight," Acker growled, his voice carrying low, "we strip away every crutch. No data feeds, no digital eyes. Noise will lie to you. Only hush will tell the truth. Fail, and you're gone." The recruits exchanged uneasy glances. Kellen Dre muttered under his breath, but no one dared speak louder. They stopped at a clearing where targets, thin steel silhouettes, had been hidden at unknown distances, their edges painted to vanish into the darkness. Acker gestured to the tree line. "You will find them," he said, "and hit them. No scope enhancements, no tech. Trust what you hear, what you feel." His eyes swept over them, pausing on Nora Vale. "Let's see if Steele remembers you." Kellen went first. He crouched, raised his weapon, and cursed. "I can't see a damn thing." He flicked uselessly at the buttons of his disabled scope, muttering numbers, trying to calculate in his head. His first shot cracked into the void, echoing empty through the trees. His second scattered wide, the third farther still. Frustration burned across his face. Mora steadied herself. She listened, scanned with patience, and finally squeezed the trigger. The first shot missed, but her second clipped steel, the faintest ring breaking the silence. She managed one more edge strike, her breath measured, face calm. Nolan Price fired with brute confidence, relying on instinct but little finesse. His bullets struck earth, bark splintering from trees. The forest swallowed his curses. Then it was Nora's turn. She lay prone, pressing her cheek to the cold earth. The world sharpened in her stillness. She closed her eyes, shutting out what little her foggy scope could offer. She listened. A stream gurgled faintly to the north. Leaves whispered east to west with each shift of air. A cricket chorus went silent for a brief heartbeat when the wind changed. Her pulse aligned with the rhythm, steady, calm. She raised the rifle, the worn stock familiar against her shoulder, and squeezed. The shot cracked. For an instant, only silence. Then, clang. Steel rang somewhere in the dark. The recruits jerked toward the sound. Even Kellen froze. Nora adjusted slightly, listening again. She felt the hush, the thin breath of the valley winding between the trees. She fired once more. Another ring echoed through the night. Akka turned his head. No smile crossed his face, but his pale eyes glinted. Again, he said. She centered herself, lowered her breathing, and pressed the trigger. The third shot struck home, the clearest clang of all. She exhaled slowly, not with triumph, but with certainty. The exercise ended in silence, the others shaken. Kellen stormed back to the line, fury in his stride. "Luck," he spat, his voice raw. "Blind chance." Akka cut him off before the words could spread. "Luck doesn't draw maps in the dark." Vale heard what you didn't. His tone carried warning. The others fell silent, even Kellen. Back at the barracks, the recruits sat in heavy quiet, the usual chatter gone. Nora leaned against the bunk, her fingers tracing the silk strip she had found hidden in the rifle. She laid it across her lap, the strange symbols glimmering faintly in the dim light. She realized then what her mother had left her, not just words, not just steel, but a way to see the invisible. The hush wasn't emptiness. It was the voice of the world, waiting for someone willing to listen. 2 days later, Akka gathered them again at dawn. His voice carried across the fog. "The hush is not theory. Tomorrow you'll prove who you are. The valley will test you at 1,800 meters. 3 rounds, no excuses." His eyes swept over them. "Bring everything you think you know. The hush will strip it bare." The recruits shifted, the weight of his words sinking deep. Nora's pulse quickened, but she felt no fear. She touched the rifle's stock, the letters engraved there. E5th, her mother's voice echoed in her chest. "Hush the noise, hear the wind." She understood now. The dark forest had not been a test of vision, it had been a doorway, and tomorrow she would step fully through. The storm didn't come from the sky, it came from inside the compound. By the time the recruits returned from morning drills, word had already spread like wildfire. Director Sloan Merrick was calling for an accelerated deployment. The usual 6 months of grueling refinement would be slashed down to weeks, maybe days. Master Sergeant Akka assembled them in the briefing hall, his jaw tight. Orders came down overnight. "Hushline wants a live trial. One of you will be fielded in an operational strike. The decision's not mine to debate." His eyes flicked, cold, toward Merrick's looming shadow at the back of the room. Kellen Dre leaned back in his chair, smirk curling. "Finally, a real mission. Some of us are ready." He threw a glance at Nora Vale, the smirk sharpening. "Some of us aren't." Nora said nothing. She sat with her arms crossed, the old rifle resting against her knee, but inside unease prickled. She knew something about Merrick's timing didn't add up. Why rush now when training had only begun to shape them? The answer came later that night. Mora had been assigned to maintenance duty in the communications wing. When she returned, her face was pale. She cornered Nora in the hallway, voice low. "I saw it. There's a beacon embedded in the training laptops. One of them's transmitting coordinates." Nora's stomach dropped. "Who's carrying it?" Raker hesitated. Kellen. His systems flagged. Merrick's techs were watching the signal. The revelation landed like a thunderclap. Kellen, arrogant and reckless, now branded a traitor? It didn't fit neatly, but the evidence Raker described was undeniable. Nora kept her voice steady. If Merrick knows, why hasn't he pulled him already? Raker's answer was grim. Maybe he planted it. Maybe Kellen's the scapegoat. The next morning, the recruits found themselves back on the range under Acker's command. But the air was different. Charged, brittle. Acker's eyes narrowed as he called out, "Diagnostic, 1200 meters, crosswinds. Vale, you're first." Nora lay prone, the silk strip spread across the earth beside her, symbols glowing faintly in the early light. The wind was alive, snarling, unpredictable. She traced its paths, listened for the hush, and squeezed the trigger. Steel rang true. Behind her, Kellen cursed under his breath. He fired, his first round landing wide. His second clipped the edge. His third went nowhere. Frustration carved lines across his face. He threw the rifle aside, stood up, and glared at Acker. "You set me up!" Kellen shouted. His voice cracked like glass. "You've been feeding her data, haven't you?" He pointed a finger at Nora. "You think she's special? She's not. She's just riding a ghost's coattails." The range went silent. Nora remained on the ground, rifle still pressed to her cheek, eyes fixed downrange. Only when she pulled back the bolt and cleared the chamber did she stand, facing him. Her voice was quiet, steady. "If ghosts fire my bullets, then what are your excuses?" The words hung heavy in the air. Acker's gaze cut sharp between them, then landed on Kellen. "Discipline," he snapped. "Dre, you're on notice. One more outburst and you're gone." But later, in the mess hall, the whispers began. Some recruits muttered that Kellen had been framed, that Merrick needed a fall guy to justify early deployment. Others said Kellen had always been reckless enough to leak data. The fracture in their trust widened with every rumor. That evening, Nora found Ari Sen hunched over a table of figures, his fingers drumming against the keys of a battered notebook. He looked up as she approached. "The beacon's signal isn't random," he said quietly. "It pulses at intervals that match drone sweeps. Someone wanted our training location lit up on enemy surveillance." Nora's breath stilled. "That explains the UAV that nearly caught us in the forest," Ari nodded. "If Dre's laptop carried it, either he's guilty or someone slipped it there." He closed the book. "Either way, Merrick benefits. A compromised recruit justifies pushing the rest of us faster into the field." The realization burned. Merrick wasn't protecting Hushline. He was using it, bending every failure and fracture to his will. And now the crosshairs had shifted squarely onto Nora. She had become the example, the test subject, the one tied to a relic and a legacy that frightened men like Merrick. The following day, the order came down officially. Acker delivered it with his usual stone voice, but his eyes betrayed frustration. "Command has chosen. A live mission is authorized. Target package will be briefed tomorrow. Vale, pack your kit. You're the one deploying." Shock rippled through the team. Raker stiffened. Ari's jaw clenched. Even Nolan Price muttered a curse. Kellen laughed once, bitter and sharp. "Of course. Send the museum piece. If she fails, we bury her and the ghost she rode in on." Nora said nothing. She simply lifted the rifle, the weight of scarred steel familiar in her hands. The silk strip brushed against her fingers, its symbols whispering through the noise. She didn't need words. The silence said enough. But deep inside, one thought coiled like a storm. This wasn't just about proving herself. Merrick was moving pieces on a board older than any of them, a board where her mother's name had once been erased. And if she went into the field, she wasn't just carrying a rifle, she was carrying truth that someone powerful wanted buried forever. Night cloaked the mountains in shadows so deep they seemed to swallow the stars. The rotors of the MH-47 thundered as it skimmed over jagged ridges. No lights, no markers, only the vibration rattling teeth and the smell of hydraulic oil thick in the cabin. Nora Vale sat wedged between Raker Mora and Ari Sen, her hands gripping the scarred rifle across her lap. The silk strip was folded carefully in her pocket. cymbals pressed against her leg like a heartbeat. Akka's voice cut through the roar. Extraction window 0453. In and out. Don't waste words. Don't waste movement. The helicopter flared, wheels grazing stone, and the team leapt into darkness. Gravel crunched under boots, then the bird was gone, swallowed by the night. Silence returned, immense and oppressive. The mountain loomed above them like a wall of black glass. They climbed hard, packs grinding into their shoulders, lungs burning in the thin air. Nora focused on rhythm, step, breath, hold. Sweat stung her eyes, her rifle digging into her ribs, every ounce of its weight reminding her of the legacy she carried. Halfway up the ridge, Akka raised his fist. The team froze, hearts hammering. A faint hum drifted overhead. The red blink of a drone skimmed across the canyon. Everyone pressed flat into the dirt. Not a twitch, not a breath. Nora felt gravel grind into her cheek. The hum lingered, then drifted away. Only then did Akka motion them forward. By first light, they reached the overlook. Below, the compound spread like a fortress carved into the mountain itself. High stone walls circled a courtyard. Guard towers marked each corner, figures patrolled with disciplined arcs. Ari crouched, tablet open, whispering data. Atmospheric pressure dropping. Wind shear high at valley floor. Mirage tightening around 800 meters. His voice was steady, but his hand trembled. Raker secured the perimeter, scanning the rear slope. Nolan dug shallow cover with his entrenching tool. Kellen set up his sleek rifle beside Nora, smirk muted but still present. "You really think that antique can shoot nearly 4 kilometers?" he muttered. Nora didn't answer. She unfolded the silk strip, laying it on the dirt beside her rifle. Symbols danced against the morning light, circles, arrows, lines marking invisible rivers. She pressed the fabric flat, then lifted the rifle to her shoulder. "Target expected in 3 minutes," Ari whispered. The compound stirred. A door creaked open. A man stepped into the courtyard, broad shoulders, robe flowing. Imran Darzi, architect of 3 embassy bombings, the reason they had climbed into this valley. Nora centered him in her cloudy scope. Her breathing slowed, the world narrowing to heartbeat and wind. Then movement. A child darted into the courtyard, chasing a ball that rolled across the stones. He laughed, oblivious, skidding to a stop just feet from Darzi. Nora froze, finger taut on the trigger. Time fractured. "Take the shot," Kellen hissed. "Not yet," Nora whispered. The boy lingered, kicked the ball and ran off. The door shut behind him. Silence returned. Darzi unrolled a prayer mat, knelt, his head bowing east. "Windows closing," Ari said, urgency beneath his breath. "Wind 8.1 west, thermal lift at valley floor, adjust 8 meters left." "Drop half," Kellen muttered, overlaying corrections. "Mirage tightening, shoot or lose it." Nora heard them, but their voices blurred into the hum of the valley. She touched the silk strip, tracing her mother's symbols. She closed her eyes, listening. The hush was there, the stream of wind curling from canyon floor, the breath of air rolling along treetops, the updraft spinning near the tower bell. She opened her eyes, steadied her pulse. The trigger broke. The rifle thundered. The bullet leapt into air, vanishing across distance. 4 seconds stretched into eternity. Vapor trail shimmered, dancing between layers of heat and cold. Darzi bowed lower, unaware. Impact. His body jerked, collapsed across the prayer mat. No cry, no alarm. Silence swallowed the courtyard. Guards didn't react. The fortress slept on. But danger hadn't passed. Headlights flared from a road below, sweeping across the hillside. A patrol truck climbing. The beams slashed inches from their hide. Every chest froze. Hearts pounded louder than engines. The lights crawled higher, then veered away, fading. "Pack up," Akka ordered, voice low but firm. Extraction in 12. Movements were tight, silent, drilled. They erased prints, covered brass, folded into shadows. Every step back up the ridge felt like a lifetime. When the helicopter returned, rotors shaking dawn, they climbed aboard without a word. Back at High Pines, The debrief room was heavy with expectation. Merrick sat at the head, eyes narrow, fingers steepled. Acker stood at the wall, arms crossed, his face unreadable. "You did it," Merrick said at last, voice flat. "Target neutralized, record distance 3,912 meters. 35 years since Delta Ridge, and the mark has been broken." His gaze locked on Nora. "You will be recognized, for now." He slid a wooden box across the table. Inside gleamed a silver medallion, a flame surrounded by mountain peaks. Only 12 had ever been awarded. Her mother had been the first. Now Nora was the 12th. The recruits stared. Even Kellen lowered his eyes. But as Nora closed the box, her hand trembling, she saw something in Merrick's expression. Not pride, but calculation. This was not the end. This was only another move on a board she barely understood. She clenched the rifle tighter, the silk strip brushing her fingers. Her mother's words echoed in her chest. "Hush the noise, hear the wind." She had carried the hush into the field, and now the hush carried her into history. The compound silence lingered in Nora's ears long after the mission, like a ghost that refused to fade. For 2 days the recruits walked the halls of High Pines with heads low, unsure if what they'd witnessed was history in the making or something darker. Nora felt the weight of the medallion in her pocket, heavier than the rifle she carried. She had broken the 35-year record. But why did Merrick's eyes glint as if she had merely played a role in his game? On the third morning, Acker summoned them all to the main briefing room. The air was sharp with anticipation. Merrick stood at the front, arms clasped behind his back, a projection glowing on the wall, still frames from the mission. The vapor trail of Nora's bullet cut across the frozen screen. "This," Merrick said, "is proof. Hushline has delivered. We have a new pinnacle shot, Vale's strike at 3,912 meters. His voice was calm, measured, but beneath it pulsed triumph. And yet, as with all records, there are questions. Who set the standard before her? Who wrote the doctrine she followed? The room tensed. Nora felt her throat tighten. Merrick tapped the screen. A faded photo appeared, a figure in desert fatigues, face shadowed, holding the very rifle now resting against Nora's chair. Letters etched faintly at the bottom, EV Delta Ridge 1990. Raker drew in a sharp breath. Ari straightened in his seat. Kellen muttered under his breath. Merrick's smile was thin. You've all heard whispers of Harbor Light. A myth, they say, but the truth is more complicated. The last time this rifle fired a world-changing shot, it belonged to Etta Vale, Nora's mother. The words struck like thunder. Nora froze, her pulse hammering. Murmurs rippled through the recruits. Kellen's smirk faltered into disbelief. She was the original record holder, Merrick continued. 3,872 meters. A shot that turned a mission. A feat erased from every file, every archive. Why? Because Harbor Light was inconvenient. Because her existence undermined narratives the military needed. So the name was struck, the record buried. Nora's chest constricted, the silk strip in her pocket burned against her skin. She whispered, almost involuntary, they erased her. Yes, Merrick said, eyes glinting. And now you have replaced her. The world will never know Etta Vale, only Nora Vale, the daughter who carried a relic into glory. History will credit you, but only if you play by the rules of silence. For the first time Nora spoke, her voice cutting the room. No, I won't be used to bury her twice. A dangerous quiet fell. Merrick's smile vanished. His eyes hardened. Careful, Vale. Truth is a currency, and currency can be revoked. You think one shot grants you freedom, it binds you tighter. Before anyone could react, Acker moved from the wall, his boots echoing on the floor. He slammed a folder down on the table, scattering papers across the recruits' laps. Photos, reports. Delta Ridge after-action files long thought destroyed. In every one, a single figure appeared with the same rifle, the same initials carved into the steel. Enough, Acker growled. His voice carried gravel and fury. Merrick buried her name. I won't bury it again. The truth lives in this steel, in the silk, in her daughter. The hush belongs to the Vale bloodline, not to your games." Merrick's jaw clenched, but before he could respond, Ari rose, holding a data drive. His calm voice sliced through the tension. "I mirrored the mission files. They contain metadata, Vale's shot encoded with E5th signatures from the rifle's optics. The system logged both names, mother and daughter. The record is dual, inseparable." Reka stood beside him. "If you silence one, the other speaks louder. We'll carry this truth out of here if we have to carve it into stone." Even Kellen, arms crossed, spoke with a bitterness that surprised Nora. "I mocked her, but I watched that bullet fly, and if you erase it again, I'll walk straight into command and burn your lies in front of every officer who'll listen." The room held its breath. Merrick's mask cracked for the first time. His voice was low, dangerous. "You have no idea what you're tampering with. Records aren't truth, they're weapons, and weapons are mine to control." Nora rose, the old rifle gripped in her hands. She stepped forward until the steel was inches from Merrick's chest, not aimed but heavy with history. "No," she said, "this weapon doesn't belong to you. It belongs to every silence my mother carried, to every voice you tried to erase, and now to me." The recruit stood with her. Acker folded his arms, his pale eyes gleaming like frost. The weight of the room shifted. Merrick realized, too late, that the hush he had tried to control was no longer his. The silence stretched, sharp and absolute. Nora felt the hush again. The same stillness she had heard in the valley, the same voice her mother had taught her to trust. It was no longer just a method. It was her legacy, her truth, her rebellion. She laid the rifle on the table. Its scarred metal caught the dim light, engraving glinting faintly. EV, Delta Ridge 90. The echo of her mother's shot now lived beside her own. "This isn't your record," she said, her voice steady. "It's ours." The hush that followed was deeper than any gunfire. It was the sound of truth breaking through 35 years of lies. The snow came late that winter, at High Pines, drifting across the ridges in a hush so thick it seemed to smother even memory. Weeks had passed since the confrontation in the briefing hall, and yet the echo of it lingered through the compound. Merrick was gone, pulled from his post pending investigation, his shadow no longer haunting the recruit's every step. For the first time since arriving, Nora Vale felt the silence of the forest as something clean, something unburdened. She stood at the edge of the memorial garden one night, the rifle across her knees, the medallion heavy in her pocket. The rows of unmarked stones caught moonlight, each a reminder of voices erased, lives folded into secrecy. She placed the silk strip across her lap, tracing its symbols with her fingertips. Her mother's voice was no longer just a whisper in the dark. It was a steady presence in the hush around her. Footsteps crunched behind her. Reka Mora appeared, her breath steaming in the cold. She said nothing at first, only sat beside Nora, the quiet between them companionable. Finally Reka broke it. "You know they'll want you to teach it. The hush. To turn it into doctrine." Nora nodded slowly. "If I don't, they'll twist it again. Rewrite it until it serves them, not the ones who need it." She looked at Reka, eyes steady. "It's not a method you own. It's a way of listening that can't be stolen unless we let them." Reka smiled faintly. "Then don't let them." The following morning the recruits gathered on the range. Snow flurried in thin veils, the valley below wrapped in mist. A new intake of trainees lined up, their rifles shining with the pride of the untouched. They whispered among themselves when Nora stepped forward, scarred rifle slung across her shoulder. One young lieutenant scoffed, his voice carrying just enough to be heard. "That thing should be in a museum." Nora set the rifle down on the mat without flinching. She slid the bolt back, the sound crisp in the frozen air. "So I was told once," she said calmly. She nodded toward the targets. "Go ahead, compare it." The lieutenant hesitated, then bent to peer through the ancient scope. His smirk faltered as clarity bloomed against all expectation. The fog of the valley etched sharp as if the steel itself remembered every breath of wind. He pulled back, words caught in his throat. Nora said nothing more. She didn't need to. The hush spoke for her. Behind her, Ari Sen set up his instruments, not to override the hush but to complement it. Kellen Dre, chastened and quieter, adjusted his rifle with a new kind of focus, no longer chasing numbers alone. Nolan Price checked the perimeter with methodical steadiness, Raker watching with the sharpness of someone who had stood on both sides of silence. Master Sergeant Acker observed it all, arms crossed, his frostbitten eyes betraying the faintest flicker of pride. For him, the hush was no longer a myth. It was alive, breathing in every motion of the new generation. As the recruits fired, some missing, some hitting, Nora walked the line. She corrected not with numbers but with gestures, a hand pointing to a blade of grass, a shift of her shoulders, a whisper to breathe with the valley, not against it. Each lesson carried the echo of her mother, the resonance of Nora Vale. When the session ended, she picked up the rifle and laid it across her mat. Snow dusted its scarred steel, glinting faintly on the engraving, EV Delta Ridge 90. Nora pressed her hand over the letters, her voice steady, carried by the wind so that all could hear. Records fade, numbers change, but knowledge endures. The range went silent. The hush wasn't absence, it was control. And in that silence, every recruit felt it. The weight of legacy, the defiance of erasure, the power of a single bullet to carve truth into history. Nora lifted the rifle, the silk strip fluttering in the breeze, and turned back toward the trainees. The future waited in their wide eyes. The hush had been passed on, and somewhere, carried on the wind, her mother's voice answered back. And that's how a simple woman with nothing but a rusted rifle carried her mother's legacy into the future, proving that silence itself can become the sharpest weapon. From the laughter of her peers to the hush of history, Nora Vale showed the world that records may fade, but truth endures. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. If you felt the weight of her story, make sure to subscribe to A Simple Woman's Stories so you never miss the next chapter we uncover. I'd love to hear what you think. Do you believe the hush is something you can train, or is it a gift only a few inherit? Share your thoughts in the comments below, I'll be reading them. And when you're ready for more, stick around. At the end of this video you'll find our other stories waiting, each one holding its own impossible twist, each one a reminder that sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest truths.